Hello, good evening, and welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor, and you are listening to Damn Radio. Here today with you. Have plenty of news to talk about. I kind of did a lot of review over the last couple of days. The 9th and the 10th of June in Moscow was the called Future Forum 2050. So they're talking about things in general. They're looking ahead, looking for the future. A lot of famous people were there. I was not there. And actually, if I'd have really thought about it, I might have tried to pull something off. My visa's still good. I should get my fat little butt over. How can I be fat and little? Get my fat rear end over there and check out some stuff and see what's going on. But there were a lot of interesting people there. And I have plenty of things that I've reviewed over the last few days. An update that I wanted to give you, but before I give you the update, I wanted to tell you that Ukraine accepted the first 1,200 or so bodies. They accepted them. I guess people like me and the failure of the, like I said last night, there's really no reason for you to not accept them. And Russia really had them by having all these bodies that they're swapping. Now, I've read a little bit more about the situation in the last little bit that says that they've been exchanging bodies fairly regularly over the time, but not in this quantity, not in this large of an amount. And still haven't found that 40,000 that allegedly is out there. But so they did start swapping the bodies back and forth. I have some opinion pieces I'd like to go into today. A little bit about India and Pakistan, which I might get to. I wanted to talk about a little bit about Libya and perhaps maybe some of that. There's some BRICS news. And yes, if JR's listening, I did hear your comment the other day about Sam would probably disagree that you think that I think BRICS is going on to the ash heap. I think your word was ash heap of history. That's possible, but I doubt it. But I am going to tell you a little bit about the difference. Okay, so you can believe what you want about this, but I'm going to tell you what it is. It's been awash in the East. People like Vladimir Solovyov, who is a known political, very far into the Russia and Putin. But I don't know what you expect. I mean, he's been doing it for years. That doesn't mean he's not worth listening. But get this. The news today, June the 11th, Russia hands over the bodies of over 1,200 soldiers to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Moscow retrieves the remains of 27 of its own service members, said Vladimir Medinsky, the top negotiator for talks with Kiev, confirmed. And this is troubling on a lot of levels. So let's listen to what this story has to say. Russia returned the remains of 1,212 Ukrainian soldiers killed in combat in the latest exchange between Moscow and Kiev. Kremlin official Vladimir Medinsky confirmed on Wednesday. The transfer was first announced by Ukraine's coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war. It said the bodies were recovered from the front lines in Russia's Kursk, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions, as well as Ukraine's Kharkov region. No names or further details were released. Medinsky, who served as Moscow's chief negotiator, said Russia received the remains of 27 of its own troops. Now they can be buried in a Christian manner, he said in a statement on Telegram. He added that the two sides had agreed to begin urgent sanitary exchanges involving severely wounded prisoners of war. Russia does not abandon its own people, Medinsky said. Moscow has previously stated it is prepared to return the remains of more than 6,000 Ukrainian troops, but accuses Kiev of delaying their acceptance. Moscow decided to return the bodies during talks with Kiev in Istanbul earlier this month. However, while Russia completed the delivery of the bodies to the designated exchange area, Ukraine rescheduled the meeting with no prior notice, and representatives were nowhere to be found, said Medinsky at the time. Despite this, Russian Lieutenant General Alexander Zorin, who was part of Moscow's negotiating team, signaled that the country was fully ready to honor the agreement, saying, "It is purely humanitarian action, not the first of this kind and regrettably not the last." As part of the Istanbul process, Russia and Ukraine agreed to conduct several POW exchanges. The exchanges have continued after the second round, with the total number of soldiers estimated at between 1,000 and 1,200 in the latest swap, according to Medinsky. Well, call me curious, call me, I don't know what, a doubting Thomas, but if we're to believe that Ukraine is winning this war, as people on our side want to talk about, how is it possible that Russia has 1,200 bodies to turn over and Ukraine has 27? And how is it that Russia still has 6,000 more to turn over? I read to you last night the requirements of the Geneva Convention regarding the fallen soldiers of the enemy. And we went through all of those things. And I tell you what, it's distressing to me because I can't imagine that Ukraine has only killed 27 Russian soldiers. Okay, I do not imagine at all. And Russia is advancing in most areas of the front. So I assume because they're advancing, they are still picking up the bulk of their own fallen. Okay? But I still can't accept, it just doesn't seem straight to me that if Ukraine isn't holding, because you can see on the front lines when you watch the maps daily, which I don't do daily, but at least, several times a week, I'll get on and check out where the lines are. And Russia is advancing now fairly quickly all the way along the lines. So if they're advancing and if they killed a lot of people who were holding the places because they cannot retreat and they're not permitted to retreat and their own government doesn't, well, I suppose I can see that they're certainly lopsided numbers, but boy, that still seems like a crazy number to me. 27 versus 6,000? And if the argument that Politico, which article I still haven't found, but Grok insists it exists, says they have another 40,000 in freezers in Russia that are waiting to be turned over. And the number I read to you last night is 300,000 for each family, or for the families of each of the fallen soldiers. They each get that payment from the government. Well, I can understand why they wouldn't want to take them back, and I could understand why they were changing the laws. But anyway, I wanted to bring you up to speed on what was going on that end of the spectrum. I don't like it. There was something that just came out not long ago that said that Zelensky has limited. Where is this? It's not out yet. It's only in. It's only on listening, and it's in Russian, so you can't really listen to it, unfortunately. On that, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. But allegedly, Zelensky has placed pretty severe limits on Ukraine's negotiating teams, and so they're not able to talk about that. But I had kind of hinted last night that I would like to talk to you a little bit about the Russian 2050. I told you I had something to talk about. Well, the person who was at the forum, there were several, including George Galloway, who I like to listen to, and also Errol Musk, which is Elon's dad. And so a couple of things happened. First of all, Errol Musk sat on a dais, up above, in a kind of a panel discussion, and he was interviewed several times. He didn't say anything detailed or dramatic, but he was on the stage several times, and one of the times he was with Sergei Lavrov. And Lavrov didn't speak English, and I kind of expected him to speak English. And Lavrov appeared on the stage several times during that briefing, and so it was very interesting to me, and I wanted to play, and I still might play Errol Musk's statements while he was over there. It's only 20 minutes or so anyway, and I may play that for you, and I have set it up to play if we need to play it. But I wanted to first paraphrase a couple of the things that he said. Well, he was also interviewed by George Galloway, and you know what I think of George Galloway. I think George Galloway is a hell of a guy, and he's pretty spot on about most of the things that he talks about, and he's a smart ass, which I like, and he's funny, which I like, and he's not your typical talk show host. And so if you want to get to see him, you can go out and watch the mother of all talk shows on Sunday nights, or you can find them anytime on YouTube channel. It's he calls it MOATS, MOATS, mother of all talk shows. And we might get into a little bit of that tonight because he's an interesting guy. But before we do that, I wanted to get to my talks about what Sergei Lavrov said, because I think, first of all, he is a very, very interesting person. And second of all, I think he's an extremely skilled foreign minister, and he speaks clearly and upfront. And I took a bunch of his speeches because he also sat on the dais several times over this 2-day period and spoke, and he gave various talks on various different things. And I want to tell you a few of these key points. And now, every chance he gets, he talks about multipolarity versus Western hegemony. And this is why, if JR is going to beat up on BRICS, this is why I think he might be wrong, is because the war against hegemony versus multipolarity, meaning having the authority to run your own country without being told how to run it by the West is what I see as the chief basis for what is going on in Ukraine and specifically about Russia. Now, if you're interested in an interesting history, go out and read about Muammar Gaddafi and see what you think about that if you don't know the history of it. And I got to admit, I only knew peripherally, what was going on there. But if you want to see more examples, pre-Ukraine examples of some of the activities that NATO, that the UN takes on in order to promote itself and to promote itself and destroy the rest of the world or the world that disagrees with it, check that out. And I may get to that article tonight. I might not get to it until Sunday, but I do intend to get to it. It's a history that should probably be revisited again, especially in light of Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, any of these other. I mean, pick them. We got plenty we could list, as far as what happened. But I think this one may perhaps be the most blatant and the one that is that most of us didn't pay attention to. I'm not saying we didn't understand, because we did, but we didn't. I think that now that we have seen through people like Doge and Elon Musk, we have seen far more deeply into what our country has been engaged in, not necessarily in our names, well, certainly in our names, but not with our express authority to do so. And perhaps it's time that we get to know that perhaps it's time for change. Perhaps, I hope the change is coming. I hope that, I have my hopes about this country that is left in better situation than when we started it in my generation. We're probably the first generation to leave it in worse condition for our children, and that's depressing. But anyway, as far as Lavrov and his points, I'm going to get to several of them because I like what he put out. And so point one, multipolarity and Western hegemony. So, and basically these are some of the translations, if you will, that I've got for you of things that he said. So the process is underway. Well, the fact that multipolarity is a geopolitical reality is also now recognized in the West. Let me remind you that representatives of the Biden administration also talked about this. Marco Rubio, my colleague, the current Secretary of State, in January 2025, called the unipolar world order an anomalous product of the end of the Cold War, when it seemed the end of history had come and everything would now be as decided in the West. Gutierrez, for all his rather controversial, not very thoughtful statements on the topic on the issue of multipolarity, clearly states that this trend is serious and lengthy, and that it is not reversible. Well, representatives, and he was the head of the EC, and he was at the BRICS conference last year, this Gutierrez guy. Well, representatives of many European countries have repeatedly acknowledged the fact that the balance of power on the world stage is not changing in favor of the West. Another thing is that all Western representatives, when they talk about this, admit the fact that they see in multipolarity not a benefit, not the realization of the principle of equality, fraternity, and freedom, but a threat, a challenge to their interests and their rule, which they have been providing for their own well-being for many centuries. And by that, he means, because he's talked about it before, I've listened to him, he's talking about the Anglo-Saxon, my way or the highway, my democracy or my kingdom, as it was before we came along. My country, the sun doesn't set on England, you remember, and it has been that way for some time, and that the West has to win, that the West has to be, and I'm not against that. I'm just a realist. The fact is that the rest of the world is far bigger than us. And so therefore, I think that the next generations should learn to play better with others on the world stage. And our children, who learned how to play better with their children of different races, transgenders, gays. Not that we didn't, but it was new to us. Okay, I've never hated people of differing views, people of differing colors. I just may have been unwashed in that respect. I didn't grow up. I don't remember seeing a person of color in the flesh. I mean, I saw them on TV sometimes. I don't remember seeing one in the flesh, a real live person of color, until one showed up in my church. And everybody was, not bad. Nobody was, oh my God, what are they doing here? It wasn't that. It was, whoa, and as kids, we were super interested, it wasn't anything like that. And, so now our children grew up used to it, right? I read an article yesterday that said in England that whites by 2030 will be the minority. And that is interesting to me, that they are going to be the minority in England. And I don't know, but that's part of it. So we had that happening in the Lavrov speech. Lavrov emphasized that multipolarity is a universal global trend. And I think that's important. Secondly, of course, we can't forget about this, the Ukraine conflict and the special military operation. Key statements. The special operation in Ukraine will continue, but in parallel, Russia is ready for diplomatic measures. The results of the special operation achieved on the ground will one day be formalized in the form of illegal documents. And the tasks that were set out, which we're currently solving as part of the SMO, they're calling them unacceptable, that, they're not going to accept them. He framed the SMO as a response to the unacceptable actions by Ukraine, as we know, alleging oppression against Russian-speaking citizens since 2014, bombing and killing their own citizens in the Donbass, and what we talked about last night about not letting them have any sort of self-determination, not even able to pick their own governors or anything like that. He talked about U.S.-Russia relations and Biden's rhetoric. Now, this one I found pretty interesting. He told Biden's story about Russia's solidity at a meeting with Putin in 2021 and noted that the rhetoric of the former president then changed and came to statements about the need to destroy Russia. So if you remember that in 2021, but before the special military operation, there were actually efforts by the Biden administration to attempt to work a little bit closer with Russia. Well, that didn't last very long, I think for quite a few reasons. A quote, he said, with the current American administration, we are already in a more correct position, a more normal position than was the case under the Biden administration. And that's definitely true. We have certainly made inroads. I'm not saying that Trump is doing everything correctly, but I heard an awesome Hegseth allegedly said that we're not going to continue to fund Ukraine. And at the meeting of the G7 coming up and the NATO, there's a NATO meeting coming up also, that they're not going to talk about Ukraine being an entry because it'll piss off the Trumpster. And nobody wants that. So they have to kind of put that on the back burner. And there's allegedly no efforts to continue to pump more money into Ukraine. One of the things I heard today was that we do intend to continue to sell them arms, which means we'll probably give it to them on credit, which means we're probably giving it to them. Or maybe our military industrial complex is giving it to them. I hope it's not our Pentagon. I hope it's not us funding the nut there, but I'm afraid it probably will be. There'll be some way to hide that kind of money in there. But according to Hegseth, they don't plan on doing any of that. So then there were talks about Bucha and the Western media. The Western media are shy and avert their eyes. I find that extremely funny. Basically, he's saying they're embarrassed because they know they're full of crap. Even in Russia, when they come over and try to attack, and most of the Russians, if you get to watch them, I watch them beat up all the time. Even there's this one Russian-speaking reporter over there who's from England, and Maria Zakharova is always beaten up on him. And frankly, he deserves it. She says, she treats him like Trump treats CNN, or, it'd be nice if you told the truth once in a while, but you come over here and you try to trick me into saying things to you that I'm not going to say, and that you're going to twist into whatever way you want. So if you want to take your, your little sound bites and go and turn it into a story, go ahead, but do that without my help. Stuff like that, And so him saying that they're shy and they avert their eyes, because it happens to him too. And so Lavrov talks about it all the time. Western politicians and the media avoid discussing details of the tragedy at Bucha and for the staging of what happens in those bodies. Now, for those of you who may not know, Bucha was the place where Russia left after the talks began in Istanbul in 2022, Russia retreated from several territories voluntarily. They knew they were going to step back. Their goal wasn't to come in and take over a lot of places, and they were on the way to, they felt like they had proven their point that, it's time to work at getting rid of this. We don't want people to die and blah, blah, blah. All the talk at that time was about that. Well, Bucha is a little town in the Donbass where the Ukrainians went in and staged all these bodies on the ground and then invited all these Western journalists in to film how Russians massacred civilians. They took dead bodies, dressed them up, put them in places. And then Russia has been for 3 years now trying to get some sort of list of the bodies, some sort of who they were, some sort of where the bodies went, some sort of investigation, because people have promised investigation into all that. So he likes to bring up those sorts of things. He also likes to bring up the Crimean beaches where they've used cluster rounds to destroy families on a Sunday afternoon, the Ukrainians did, and that was a horror story. He likes to talk about Navalny's poisoning because they've been trying to get the tests of all of that, because they're the ones that sent him to Germany, and they sent all the records with him and all the tests that were with them, and so they want to see what happened in between Russia and Germany with the body, with the records, with everything, and nobody will provide them any different records than the ones that they provided. So it's once again a false narrative of Western press, and he goes, you guys accuse us of having a press that has no freedom, and yet we can't get to the bottom of anything. He says the same thing about Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 also. He wants to. He says, who blew that up? How about you give us some news about that at some point? Wouldn't that be nice? And he never gets it. So on Navalny's poisoning, he said Lavrov spoke about an important circumstance that Germany prefers to keep silent when they accuse Russia of poisoning Navalny. And he alleges that Germany suppresses information about the poisoning because it didn't happen. And so he talks about that. He likes to talk about British involvement in Ukraine. The British are 100% helping Ukraine prepare terrorist attacks against the interior of Russia, he says. He accuses the UK of terrorism, basically, by providing the intelligence to Ukraine. The 2014 and the Kiev regime and the changes and how the West set them up, he, of course, went into that again. On global governance and the UN. And here's where I kind of talked to JR about whether or not the UN is going to continue to be the top dog, or whether the financial mechanisms are going to go other directions, against the SWIFT system. Maybe the UN sticks around. Maybe the UN finally pulls its head out of its collective butt and does something different than BRICS. But more and more people are joining the BRICS, and more people are staying away from Western hegemony and the dollar. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. So there you have that. Now, he gave a lot longer speech, but I want to get to Errol Musk's speech and what he said. And I may play some of that for you because it was pretty interesting to listen to him talk. And the first part of it all wasn't all that long. And so I'm going to try to find that clip. I mean, I know I have it, so it's right here in my little bag of tricks. And no, I didn't say that's. My computer is going kind of slow today, and I don't like that. So there you have it. So the Errol Musk goes back to, it's only his part of this, and he's talking to Lavrov, and so it's only about 5 minutes. So I will go ahead and play it for you, and we can then hear it in his own words. Now, I'm not saying anything for or against this guy, and you can find out and talk about whether Errol Musk is anybody that should be listened to or not. I don't believe he was going over there at the behest of Elon or anything like that. But he was talked to several times when he was in this forum. And this is the one when he was sitting with Lavrov, and he complimented Lavrov and he talked about it. And I want you to listen to this because he was saying a few things about it. I think it's one of his other appearances during the same forum that he talked about the Trump and Elon blow up with each other, which I see they finally collectively, between the two of them, have started to say at least the right things. So let's listen to what he has to say in the first 5 minutes of this.
I listened with great interest to Minister Lavrov. So well explained. What I see today is the world is in a terrible state of flux. The countries around the world do not trust their governments in almost every case, and they have a lot of good reason for not trusting their governments. And last year, I had the opportunity in 2024 of traveling through the United States. And I can tell you that at that time, under the Biden administration, the country was in a state of, the people were in a state of shock, not knowing what lies ahead for them as this administration under this man, this, in my opinion, not a very good man, was doing to the country. And I have a lot of my family there, and they were asking, where are we going to go? We can't go anywhere else now. We came to America because this was going to be the place we could get away from all the terrible things that are happening around the world. And now it's coming to the United States. And by God's grace, in my opinion, Donald Trump was elected to be president at the end of last year with the help of my family. And everything changed. Everything changed. Everybody started smiling. I went to America, everybody was relieved. Everybody was breathing properly. I spent April this year in America. I like to tell people that, I like to think I should say to people that 80% of the population that I met from California to Texas last month in April was behind Trump, is behind Trump, 80%. That's not true. 100% behind Trump. 100% behind Trump. Trump talks about sovereignty for the United States. I believe you only come right when your country's sovereignty is established. I like the idea of multipolarity and all that sort of stuff, but first your own country, and then relations with each other. That works. Coming to Russia for the first time myself, I need to tell you, and I think many people here don't know this, but when you grow up in the West, you are taught from a very early age that Russia is a terrible place where you have to duck around dark shadows for fear of people killing you or stabbing you. You cannot live there under normal circumstances. You will be put in front of a firing squad if you do anything that they don't like. This is wrong. This is so wrong. I arrived here. I was going to come with my daughter, Alexandra. She's 32 years old now, and she's very close to me. But anyway, she was going to come on this trip. She joined me on a trip to India. And as we were about to leave, as it happened, Dubai for Moscow, she received instructions from my sons, do not go to Russia under any circumstances. And then I received messages from other people around Europe, do not go to Russia. Why? I said, why? Why must I not go to Russia? What is it? What am I supposed to be frightened of? And I won't say they couldn't tell me. They sort of intimated that my life is at risk if I come to Russia. And, I arrived here, and the first thing I saw was perfect, total civilization in every direction. I see a city that easily rivals ancient Rome, and probably, I made the comment to somebody earlier, is by far, not by a little, but by far, the premier capital city in the world. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, I'm a critical person. Yeah, so I would like to say to Minister Lavrov that I've always enjoyed watching him on the television. He always has something quite witty to say. And so I've always enjoyed watching him on television. He always seems to come out the winner. And so what I'd like to sort of suggest to him is, how can we change the perception of the West about Russia? Because I think this is probably, if not the finest, one of the finest communities in the world that I've seen.
Знаете, спасибо за добрые слова. Мне кажется,
He said, thank you for the very kind words. And then he goes on in Russian. There's a translation of this in English where he talks over it, but it is terrible. I don't know where they got the English guy to do this, but it is atrocious. It's really no good. And so he goes on to say how, he appreciates what was going on. He talked a little bit along a couple of the lines that I talked about with you, but nothing too far involved. This was more of a lighthearted, and his part goes on for another 10 minutes or so, where Lavrov talks. And I'm on something called, if you're interested in going out and watching this, it's called Times New World. And just understand that the translation done on Lavrov's part is really weak. And so I actually downloaded it into my transcriber to see if to have it do it for me, and it gave me 2.5 hours of content of Sergei Lavrov. I've got 2 hours of his speech, and I could read it to you, but I'm not gonna. And not just this part of the speech, but everything he said at the Forum of the Future 2050. And now, I wanted to point out to you that Mr. Musk was interviewed several times while he was over there. And he had said, now, how many of you, and I don't mean this as, oh, gee, great Sam, but how many of you get these other points of view? I want to tell you that everywhere that I have been in Russia, and that's quite a few places, the restaurants are fantastic. The people are amazing. The cars are just what you could get here. You can buy anything you want over there, sometimes better, definitely cheaper. And they sell, in every city, people, all the people come in and sell their fruits and vegetables on the street. You can go to, if you get fast food, the food is better. I mean, much better. And I don't mean, I mean, like huge better food, especially fast food. Papa John's pizzas. And if Matthew should be joining me tomorrow night, I believe, on the program for tomorrow, my brother Matthew Von Trapp. We used to have this discussion quite a few times while we lived in Qatar, because I gotta tell you, in Qatar, the fast food, if you ate some, it wasn't like fast food. If you went to a pizza place, you got the best Papa John's you ever ate. And I don't mean that lightly. And I'm not the only one who can tell you that. If you get fast food somewhere else, you definitely notice the difference. And it's crazy. So let's see what other key points that Errol Musk put out. But I would tell you that they're every bit as civilized. Uh, I'll give you an example. Here's one that you should probably know about. Now, over the past 6, 7 years, I've bought tons and tons and tons of building materials and supplies, Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, places like that. There's a place called Strojmart. Stroj means to build. Stроительство is building and like building profession. Stроительство, строительные материалы is building materials. And you can go to, I think it's called Strojmart. And so Building Mart. And it's every bit as big as a Home Depot, and they have several of them in all the bigger towns, have several of them. The stuff that you get in there is same as you would get here. You can go buy in the spring. I remember buying a one of them rocker chairs. Just they all come from China anyway, just like here. And you can get one of those rocker chairs for sitting outside. That it's shaded over the top, and it has you can lay in it. It's 7, 8 feet long, and it has a rocker swing for outside. I mean, anything you want to buy here, anything. I mean, imagine what you got here, what you can buy there, but anticipate it being quite a bit cheaper. They're closer to China, by the way. Before I forget, I'm going to go back to the Errol Musk's points. But I was reading another article that there's the longest train system in the world is going to do 2 trips a month between a northern Russian city and North Korea. And they finished it, and they built a second bridge across the small bay between Russia and North Korea, and that is one of their bigger trade partners. And they now have this. And I was sitting there thinking, man, the trip on the train takes 8 days. 8 days on a train to get from, and it's the longest train in the world. And I was like, man, I'd love to do that. I've always said I wanted to get on the Orient Express because that I always thought was the longest, but I learned today that it's not. It used to be, but it's not any longer. The longest one in the world, single route, is I'll have to look up the city that it comes from, but I found that very interesting, and maybe I'll go take it. And I don't think we're allowed in North Korea. I don't remember if an American passport holder can get into North Korea. I don't know. Anyway, back to what Errol Musk said. Here are a couple of excerpts from his key points and appearances at this Forum of the Future 2050 in Moscow. Elon Musk's father said he would like to learn leadership skills from Vladimir Putin. Now, he can get beat up for that. How'd you like it that he was saying that nobody wanted him to go? Nobody wanted him to go to Russia, told him don't go, told his whoever the family members called up and said don't go to Russia under any circumstances. Do not go. I got to tell you, when I was going to Kazan last year, I've had people tell me the same thing. Oh, aren't you afraid to go there? Absolutely not. The place is fantastic. The people are fantastic. The culture is amazing. The food is out freaking standing by any stretch, and it's much cheaper. It's just amazing, and I think there ought to be more people that go over there and say some of the popular things on YouTube these days are people who have moved over there from the West or who stay over there half the year or something and give a show. I've thought about doing something similar and going over and just broadcasting from there. Maybe I'll do that this year and go over for several weeks and still do my show from Russia and get some English-speaking Russians to sit down with me. That would be a lot of fun. And I think I might go over to do it. And then a lot of people will talk to me in Russian over there. So heck, I don't want to cause any trouble for myself or anybody else. But it's still, I mean, I can't imagine that we shouldn't. It ought to be a different world. And the Russian people are certainly not our enemies, nor should they be. Okay. Anyway, he gave his, in an interview with Russian state media Izvestia during the forum, Errol expressed admiration for Putin and called him a very stable, pleasant man. He said this also in April 2025 on BBC, where he said that his family was a little bit in awe of Putin. He criticizes Western media. The Western media is actively making Russia America's sworn enemy. That's been going on for 30 years. And, they've been trying to make it worse for years and years. Heck, they were starting to do it when I was still in the service. And this is what, after the wall had come down and we were supposed to be getting along better. And instead, no. We switched it. Here are some of his comments on the feud of Elon and Trump. Elon Musk's close man revealed the real reasons for the quarrel between American billionaire and U.S. President Trump. And here's what he said. Elon did not catch one important point and was saying, you can't do that. So I'm not sure. That's it. Maybe it wasn't translated properly, but I didn't hear that part. I always caught that from the news. They've been under incredible stress for 5 months. Give them a break, he said, referring to Elon Trump. And that was on Ren TV and Sarsgaard. He called Elon's actions a mistake and expressed hope for a reconciliation and attributed to the feud distress. He has admiration for Moscow. You heard that part. He has appreciation for Russian culture and food. Elon Musk's father arrived in Moscow and almost fell off his chair when he saw a cutlet with mashed potatoes. The cutleti are just fantastic. And I make a pretty good cutleti. The cutleti are pretty darn good. And there's some really good food. In an interview with Sarsgaard TV, he expressed delight at Russian dishes like borscht and mashed potatoes with cutlets. And I like borscht as well. And I've begun to make my own borscht. You got to have the right beets, though. And you can never find them except if you go to a place. I don't remember there being a Sprouts in Missouri. Maybe there is. I don't know. But there's this place here called Sprouts, and they have these beets that are big as your head. And so I'll go in and buy one beet and then chop that sucker up and make some fantastic borscht. His general impressions of Russians. He gave an interview to the Kremlin-aligned Sarsgaard TV, during which he praised Russians as some of the smartest people in the world. And I will tell you that they make fun of our schools. When they come over here, their children are far ahead of where ours are, especially if they're English speaking. And they learn more. Now I want to give you a chance, and I hope you get to George Galloway. Now, a lot of times, a lot of these speeches are the trouble with them is that they are translated from English into Russian and then back to English. And so that sometimes creates a bit of a problem when you see them, because they've taken his words and then made them for the home audience. And then when we get them, they've been translated back, like that terrible Lavrov. Lavrov should have answered that in English, because they allowed Musk's, well, not that they allowed, he doesn't speak Russian, but they allowed or had Errol Musk speak in English with Lavrov, and Lavrov's English is fantastic. He could have said that in English, but it's a Russian forum, and so I understand it. But another guy who appeared is George Galloway, and I tell you about George, and if you get a chance on Sundays especially, listen to his mother of all talk shows, and we may get to some of that today. But of course, I've been talking far more than I planned on some of these topics. Excuse me, by the way, have the hiccups. When Galloway was asked, he's got a few quotes that he said during a panel discussion on, because he was on the same panel as but I can't get a full copy of the whole thing. So you got to get it in parts. Parts is parts. What part is that from your chicken nuggets? Well, parts is parts. Doesn't matter. Chicken beaks get ground up and you get some of those. Anyway, in his panel discussion on the multipolar world in the 21st century, Galloway questioned whether U.S. President Trump was truly in control in America. Now, I've said some of the same things. Mine is facetiously, but he is suggesting that a deep state is still undermining his authority. I agree with that, especially in Ukraine. He referenced alleged U.S. strikes on Russian bases, implying that these were carried out by operatives without Trump's direct approval. Now, that's possible, and it aligns with anti-Western narratives casting doubt on U.S. governance. Now, I think Trump is in control, but I wonder, and remember he did his survey that I told you about last week that said that 60% of the people believed that Trump either signed off on the authority for Kiev to use U.S. intelligence for their drone attacks on Russian nuclear fleet, which would be a big mistake because that breaks treaties. And then he asked the same question. It was 80-20 if they said that, isn't it more likely that somebody else gave the authority to Kiev to use Western intelligence and gave the go-ahead to go ahead and drone attack the nuclear bomber fleets of planes without Trump knowing. I find that more likely myself. So I doubt, I'd be in the 40% because I doubt that Trump gave the go-ahead. It's hard to believe that somebody didn't give the go-ahead, though, but I still give Trump the benefit of the doubt because he doesn't want this to continue much longer. Then he gave an exclusive interview, and he argued that Britain's role in the Ukrainian conflict predates the 2022 invasion, and tracing it to 2014. I have seen plenty of that, and if you don't watch Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire, which you can still find, I had to buy it on, I think I bought it on Apple, if I recall. That is something that you should probably watch. Now, they label it as propaganda everywhere else, but that's only because they don't like its contents. And if you haven't seen it, you probably should see it, because now we all know that 90% of it is true. He accused the UK of using military capabilities for nefarious purposes. he aligns very much with Russia in that regard. He does. Now, I don't say that it's absolutely certain, but I believe that we were far more involved in the West, both England and America, than we can say. He had comments to say also about the arson cases against Keir Starmer's houses and cars and stuff like that. Here's a quote. If they were Afghan Muslims, it would be terrorism. Prime Minister, have you ever met these men now sitting in Belmarsh, which is a prison that they take them to? And Galloway raised concern about a UK legal case where 3 Ukrainians and 1 unidentified man were accused of setting fire to properties linked to Prime Minister Starmer. He questioned why they were not charged with terrorism, suggesting bias in the judicial system. He speculated that if the suspects were Afghan Muslims, the charges would be more severe. But since they were Ukrainians, they let it slide. Galloway wondered whether the trial's postponement to April 26 was an attempt to let the public interest fade in such cases. This statement, reported by Sputnik, reflects Galloway's tactic of challenging the West. Well, everybody should challenge the West. We're wrong in a lot of respects. He gave his impressions of Lavrov's speech. He told Telsgard that he was impressed by Lavrov's speech at the forum and expressed positive sentiment. Well, I'm telling you that Lavrov is just a very strong foreign minister anyway. And if he and Rubio could ever get in a room together, I feel pretty good about Rubio still. I still think he has his deep state / military-industrial complex, strong slants. But I think he's still an intelligent and thoughtful person. So I hate to say that he's in this. I wouldn't put him in the same category, not willingly and not quickly, as I would with the Lindsey Graham types. I wouldn't do that. But, I think I'd love to see this war end. I'd love to see us get out of these debacles that we're involved in. Now, Galloway also had an anti-Western quote. George Galloway speaks about the Western goons who would have us in a nuclear war with Russia tomorrow. Death rates of 5 billion and nothing left of Britain but ash. That's a little harsh, but he's a funny guy. And this was posted by a guy named Gordon 983-913-058 on X, and it paraphrases Galloway's warnings about Western leaders. So it's pretty funny. He was on a couple of panels. The multipolar one I told you about. He got an interview with the Moscow Times. He gave an address. And so it was quite interesting. This Forum of the Future 2050 is an event that, of course, does not get talked about in the West at all, and it probably should be, because there were a lot of important people there and a lot of countries represented, and it's not just about Russia. There's a lot of positive coming out of it, and so. Let's see here. What else do we have? There's the George Galloway. Allegedly, Alex Jones was supposed to be there too, but I haven't found any discussions about him. There is a guy that I've brought to you before, a guy named Alexander Dugin, that was given some speeches as well. And there were, plenty of people there, to talk about the I told you about the bodies that were swapped already. If you get now George Galloway had a 2 hour and 20-minute interview or show that included an interview or parts of it with, there it is, he talked to Errol Musk, and he does his own polls on there. And this one, he did his show from Moscow. And so if you get a chance, it's called My Son Elon, Moats with George Galloway. Now, the trouble is, it's 2 hours and 15 minutes long, so I haven't gotten a chance to listen to but 20 minutes of it. And I'm not sure I'll get the chance to hear any more. Well, I will, but I'm not sure when and whether I'll get it all. Let's see. I already got to the bodies that we're handing over. Now let's discuss why the fate of Russia-Ukraine is being decided in Turkey. Moscow and Ankara have plans for the future. Apparently, this is by Morad Sadigzada, president of Middle East Studies Center, and he's a visiting lecturer in Moscow. Before the latest round of Russia-Ukraine talks in Istanbul, Turkish Minister Hakan Fidan paid a visit to Moscow and to Kiev. These emerged as potentially pivotal moments in the context of the effort to resolve this conflict. While Moscow visit was officially framed as a step toward deepening bilateral Russia-Turkey relations, the true priority of the visit became evident from the first day. The agenda extends far beyond routine diplomacy and upon much more delicate and consequential matters. The formal protocol lay in an informal mission. Beyond the public statements, it was clear that Fidan's trip was aimed at probing Moscow's position ahead of a possible round of peace talks with Kiev. This interpretation is supported by the choice of interlocutors, his meeting with Vladimir Medinsky, who is the chief head of the Russian delegation, as well as his audience with President Putin himself. The symbolism was heightened by the fact that Fidan would proceed to Kiev following his visit in Moscow, underscoring Ankara's mediation role. The information vacuum initially surrounding the visit was also telling. Neither the Kremlin nor the Turkish side disclosed any detail of their discussions, instead breaching only brief summaries referring to important high-level contacts. This silence signals the president's presence of sensitive topics related to security, conflict resolution, or potential diplomatic breakthrough. Shortly thereafter, RIA Novosti, a large news outlet in Russia, citing an informed source, reported that negotiations between Russia and Ukraine were indeed discussed with Medinsky. Following the meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, Fidan confirmed that important issues for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan were discussed, including the situation in Ukraine. Lavrov expressed gratitude for Turkey's efforts in providing a platform negotiation. He said that things went very well in Istanbul during the first times that they spoke, and serving a diplomatic acknowledgement of Russia's willingness to return to this format. However, he made it clear that for Moscow, the fundamental issue remained the elimination of the root causes of the conflict. I believe they've been pretty damn solid on that. The West, which sought Ukraine's victory and Russia's isolation, now finds itself fractured and adrift. Europe increasingly reveals its dependence on the U.S., not only militarily, but politically. Yet with President Trump's return to the White House, a tectonic shift has occurred. The new administration has adopted a restrained, almost isolationist approach to the issue of Ukraine. Despite earlier bold claims that he could end the war within 24 hours, remember that, Trump has quickly encountered the harsh reality of geopolitics. In the first 100 days of his new presidency, there's been no diplomatic breakthrough, no direct pressure on Moscow, and no effective push to compel Kiev toward compromise. I've told you what that would entail. Just cut them off. And it sounds like that's where we're going, in all truth. Recognizing the impossibility of achieving his stated goals and facing the risk of a domestic political crisis, Trump has begun to gradually retreat from direct involvement in resolving the conflict, delegating initiative to regional actors. This is not only a tactical maneuver, but a strategic reorientation. Trump is determined to do what? Not let Ukraine become his war, as Syria became Obama's or Afghanistan Biden's. Well, I'm telling you, he's very, very close. And I've been saying that for a while. I hope I'm wrong. To avoid reputational collapse, the White House is now consciously shifting responsibility to Ankara, a capital which, unlike Brussels or Washington, still retains a degree of trust in the Kremlin. Against this backdrop, Turkey, under the leadership of Erdogan, stands as the only platform where substantive talks could realistically be resumed. Turkey has already demonstrated its capacity as a mediator. In 2022, the most promising negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegations took place where? In Istanbul. Despite intense Western pressure, both parties had at the time reached a threshold of possible compromise. That experience has not been forgotten, neither in Moscow nor in Kiev. Russia, for its part, has increasingly signaled its readiness for peace, but not on the basis of unilateral concessions. It seems funny to me that Zelensky wants to force, he keeps saying that the West needs to force Putin to do something. And Donald Trump is playing it correctly, telling Zelensky, hey, I'm not going to fight your battles for you. Go take care of it, if you want to do it. And I like that approach. I hope it stays that way. Moscow insists on firm, and I think Zelensky actually created a lot of this bad blood himself. This, he peed in his own bed. He's got to sleep in it. And there he is, sleeping in it now for what he did offending Trump. You don't come over there and you don't come in and tell Trump what to do in his own house. What kind of nut are you? Anyway, for decades, Russia has warned of the fragility of the existing global security architecture, one built on Western hegemony, unilateral intervention, and double standards. That's why I'd love to get to that article on Gaddafi. Oh my God. Study up on it before we get there. Maybe I'll talk about that with my brother Matthew. I think he's a connoisseur, I believe. Since the 90s, it has consistently pointed to the threats posed by NATO expansion, the abandonment of equal dialogue. We're not equal. Some people are more equal than others, which, is how the West likes it. And the West's failure to consider the legitimate interests of other powers. These warnings went unheeded. Today, the Kremlin no longer views Western capitals as reliable partners, which is why, during recent talks with Fidan, Lavrov made it unequivocally clear, just like he does all the time, if there was to be a second round of negotiations, it must again take place in Turkey. Moscow is sending a very clear message. Peace is possible, but only under conditions that address the root cause of the conflict, or causes. These include firm guarantees against Ukraine's NATO accession, as well as neutral status for Ukraine and recognition of Russia's core security concerns, which everybody ignores and has been ignoring for 30 years at least. The West, by contrast, has lost its moral authority in the eyes of Moscow. The policy of sanctions, rejection of compromise, exploitation of the Ukraine conflict, overt interference in peace efforts have all but destroyed any remaining trust. Bojo going over there in 2022 was like a nail in the coffin. The US and the EU are no longer seen as impartial mediators. Even rhetorically, Western leaders continue to insist on a Ukrainian victory, ruling out the possibility of any genuine dialogue. They're still doing that in Europe, by the way. And even the Lindsey Grahams of the world over here are still doing it. And I can't imagine that people still believe that Ukraine can win this war. They cannot, not by themselves. And somebody needs to wake up to that. I don't know. There are a lot of us saying it, and a lot of us that know far more than the typical, yahoo. The EU and UK, left without the American umbrella, are increasingly confronted with their own vulnerability. Military, financial, and political support for Kiev is unsustainable without Washington. And as the US begins to distance itself, European unity begins to fracture. Eastern European nations call for continued confrontation, while major Western European economies show signs of fatigue and are beginning to openly discuss the need to find a way out of the impasse. In this context, Turkey finds itself presented with a unique window of opportunity. Its interests are multifaceted and long-term. First, peace in the Black Sea region is crucial for Turkey's economic stability, encompassing maritime trade, grain shipments, energy transit, and control over migration flow. Second, the role of mediator allows Ankara to bolster its ambition as a regional and even global actor, positioned as an alternative to both Western and Eastern diplomacy. Third, peace building in Ukraine provides a means for Turkey to balance its relations with both Russia and the West, maintaining strategic autonomy without severing ties in Moscow or Washington. Ankara is operating according to a logic of historical revisionism. Erdogan seeks to restore Turkey's stature as a power whose influence stretches from the Balkans to the Caucasus, from the Eastern Mediterranean to Central Asia. There's talk that, by the way, Erdogan wants to restore the Ottoman Empire, so he's in. The resolution of Ukraine is key not to just to Turkey's participation in global diplomacy, but its ability to shape the rules of diplomacy. What now draws Moscow and Ankara together goes far beyond tactical cooperation or pragmatic exchange in regional conflict. Increasingly, the two are united by shared worldview and a desire to redefine the global order that for decades has been shaped by Western dominance. Here's where it gets interesting, by the way. Both Russia and Turkey are growing far more critical of the unipolar system, one in which the US and its closest allies impose universal rules, but don't apply them to themselves. I happen to agree with that wholeheartedly. We ignore them for us. For Moscow, this is a continuation of its historic struggle for sovereignty and security along its own borders. For Ankara, it's a path toward reclaiming geopolitical weight in line with its historical and civilizational legacy. Both countries find common cause in their desire to move beyond the destabilizing politics of Western hegemony, a system that undermines global stability, particularly across the global South. and obstructs the emergence of a more just international order. Turkey is increasingly vocal in its solidarity with Moscow and Beijing on key issues. This is true. From reforming international institutions like the UN and like the SWIFT banking and all of those things that don't lean so heavily toward the dollar, right? To reducing reliance on the on the US dollar as a global payment instrument. Today, Ankara speaks in the same language as the BRICS countries, advocating for the de-Westernization of the global economy to end sanction-based coercion and the rights of regions to pursue their own paths of development. Including the U.S., by the way. I've heard talk that we need to become the Americas again. While Turkey is not yet a member of BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, its interest in these blocs is unmistakable. Ankara regularly takes part in SCO summits as a dialogue partner, and the Turkish leadership's remarks on potential BRICS membership have sparked debate in diplomatic circles. They've never been against. I think they might be a little more fearful than others because of how involved they are and how large they are in NATO, the European Union. For Turkey, closer alignment with Russia and with broader global South, including China, Iran, and other Arab nations, is not merely an alternative to the EU or NATO, but a strategic choice. The Turkish political elite understand that the West no longer sees Ankara as an equal partner, but at best as a tool to contain Russia and Iran. In this light, cooperation with Moscow offers Turkey a chance not only to enhance its standing in the post-Soviet space and the Black Sea region, but also to help shape a new world order, multipolar, equitable, and free from Washington's dictates. Now that doesn't, it's a well-written article. You don't have to agree with it. You can still think that U.S. hegemony and U.S. dominance of the world is, God-granted and it will continue forever. But the rest of the world doesn't see it that way. This is why Russian-Turkish efforts toward resolving the Ukraine conflict should not be viewed as an isolated diplomatic episode, but rather as part of a broader attempt to redirect the arc of global history. Thus, a new diplomatic reality is emerging from the ruins of the old one. The U.S. has lost its initiative and credibility. The EU is weak and dependent, and Moscow has made it clear it will no longer play by the old rules. I believe China is in that same boat. Against this backdrop, only Turkey possesses the necessary qualities, geopolitical position, and trust of both parties, independent agency, and strategic interest to serve as an effective, perhaps decisive, platform for negotiation to end the Ukraine conflict. And if peace is to be made, it will be brokered not in Geneva or Washington, but in Istanbul. Now, I wanted to share that with you because, and again, that was written by a guy named Murad Sadiqzada. I hope I said that right. He's the president of Middle Eastern Studies Center and a visiting lecturer at HSE University in Moscow. And tell you what, it's an interesting world in which we live at present. And I am very glad to be living in it. So I think I'm going to get into maybe another tale. We've got hopefully enough time for one more. We're not going to get into the other big one that I wanted to do But let's see. Where am I? Oh, yeah. Did you hear about the Ukrainian who went on a knife spree, stabbed a bunch of people in Amsterdam? Nonsense. And that's a pretty short article, so maybe I'll get to that one and see where we go with that. That should bring us right about up to it. I think it's a pretty short. Yeah, and basically he was a military deserter from Ukraine, and he got out of Ukraine by going to see his mother, and then he never went to see his mother. He went to Amsterdam, and apparently he'd been speaking about it for a long time in the military and out. That his goal in life. Get this. This is his goal in life. This is how bad things are in Ukraine and in the Ukrainian military. If this is your goal, a Ukrainian national who faces multiple attempted murder charges after a stabbing spree in Amsterdam has been identified as a military deserter who dreamed of spending the rest of his life in a Western European prison, according to a Dutch media investigation. The suspect, who is accused of injuring 5 people near Dam Square in March, was identified as 30-year-old Roman D. Isn't this crazy? According to reports, Roman D served in the Ukrainian artillery unit. Acquaintance said he became increasingly withdrawn after suffering a concussion in 2023 and spoke of wanting to be jailed for life in a Western European country. He often said that he wanted to kill someone in Norway so he could go to a prison there and be cared for the rest of his life. A former commander told whatever this is, NOS, I don't know what that is. The remarks were reportedly dismissed as jokes at the time. When I first heard what Roman did in Amsterdam, I thought the idiot's dream has come true. Crazy. He remained in contact with fellow soldiers, described him as being interested in a wide range of ideologies. He wrote about Allah and something about supporting Palestine. Surprisingly enough, he was also very active in supporting the LGBT community, one source told the broadcaster. In his online presence, that was suggested he had an association with neo-Nazism, though friends claim his interest wasn't well developed. Officials in Eastern European countries, including Poland and the Czech Republic, expressed concern over the potential influx of demobilized Ukrainian soldiers once Kiev lifts martial law and allows fighting-age men to leave the country, because veterans face a number of different problems: adaptation issues, psychosis, depression, addiction, said Polish military psychiatrist Radoslav Tworis, who warned in February the spectrums of these disorders are very wide indeed. Whew. 'Tis indeed an interesting world we live in. BRICS hosted over the last couple of days the 7th Youth Energy Summit in Brasilia earlier this week. 100 young professionals, government officials, and energy experts from across BRICS countries showed up. There was a youth amount. I think their age limit was 35, but I don't recall how young they had to be. But they all look very young in the photos. And they were also had a group like that last year in Russia. Plenty of these are going on. And that'll about wrap up the show. I want you to be sure to follow Damn Radio at damnradio.com. You can go to /live and listen to Damn Radio live anytime you like. Some great music. I like to listen. You can go to /schedule and get our complete schedule. And you can go to /podcast and listen to all of our back shows. For my show, International Flavor, you can go to www.internationalflavor.com. and get all of my shows. I upload them right after the show. So right after this, I will be uploading this show, and you are welcome to listen to it repeatedly over and over and download it as many times as you see fit. There's an app that you can download, the International Flavor app, that will allow you to listen to them and be notified when new ones come out, as is they're a damn radio app, and you can download the app and it will let you know when new episodes are ready. Join me tomorrow night with my brother Matthew. I think we have guaranteed it, and that will be all as we wrap